In January 1977, a Senate committee published a document that changed what every American ate for the next 50 years. Not a law, not a vote, not a debate that anyone remembers. A report. It was called Dietary Goals for the United States. 41 pages, published by the Senate Select Committee on Nutrition and Human Needs. It told Americans to eat less fat, less saturated fat, less cholesterol. It told them sugar was not the problem. Within a decade, those recommendations had reshaped the American food supply. Food manufacturers removed fat from their products and replaced it with something else. You already know what they replaced it with. What you were never told is who was in the room when the science was decided, and who paid for the science before the room ever met. The Senate Select Committee on Nutrition and Human Needs was chaired by George McGuffin. It had been created in 1968 to address hunger and malnutrition in America. By the mid-1970s, it had expanded its mandate into dietary guidelines for the general population. In 1977, the committee was running out of time. Its funding was ending. McGovern wanted to leave a legacy. He wanted a document. The staff member who wrote the first draft of Dietary Goals was not a scientist. His name was Nick Mottern. He was a journalist and political staffer who had previously covered labor issues. Mottern spent several months reading the available nutritional research and consulting with one primary scientific advisor, a Harvard nutritionist named Mark Hegsted, who believed strongly that dietary fat caused heart disease. One writer, one primary source, 41 pages that would reshape the American diet. The science Mottern and Hegsted were drawing from was not settled. It was actively contested. The diet-heart hypothesis, the idea that saturated fat raises cholesterol and cholesterol causes heart disease, had been proposed by a physiologist named Ancel Keys in the 1950s. Keys was charismatic, aggressive, and politically connected within the nutrition establishment. He was also selective with his data. Keyes' famous 7 countries study claimed to show a direct relationship between fat consumption and heart disease across 7 nations. He had data from 22 countries. He used 7. The countries he excluded did not fit the pattern he was trying to establish. This was documented by his contemporaries at the time. Researchers who challenged his methodology were dismissed, marginalized, and in several cases defunded. The committee built its recommendations on his foundation. While the diet-heart debate was playing out in academic journals, a separate conversation was happening in corporate boardrooms. The sugar industry had a problem. Early research in the 1950s and 1960s was pointing toward sugar, not fat, as a primary driver of heart disease and metabolic dysfunction. A British physiologist named John Yudkin published research linking sugar consumption to cardiac risk throughout the 1960s. The industry needed that research to go away. In 2016, researchers at the University of California, San Francisco published a paper in JAMA Internal Medicine that changed everything. They had found internal documents from the Sugar Research Foundation, the industry's primary research funding organization, in archival collections at Harvard, the University of Illinois, and other institutions. The documents showed that in 1964 and 1965, the Sugar Research Foundation paid 3 Harvard scientists the equivalent of approximately $50,000 in today's money to review the existing literature on sugar, fat, and heart disease. The scientists selected which studies to include. They selected which studies to exclude. And they produced a review concluding that fat, not sugar, was the primary dietary cause of heart disease. The review was published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1967. It did not disclose the funding source. For decades, nobody knew who had paid for it. One of the three Harvard scientists who wrote it was Mark Hegsted, the same Mark Hegsted who served as the primary scientific advisor for the 1977 Dietary Goals. The same document that told 200 million Americans to eat less fat. After 1977, the food industry moved fast. If fat was the enemy, fat had to be removed. And if fat was removed, something had to replace it to maintain texture, palatability, and shelf life. That something was sugar. High fructose corn syrup, or refined carbohydrates. By the mid-1980s, the low-fat movement had become a food industry transformation. Low-fat yogurt, low-fat cookies, low-fat salad dressing, fat-free everything. Each product reformulated to remove the macronutrient the government said was dangerous and replace it with the one the government said was fine. Between 1980 and 2000, obesity rates in the United States roughly doubled, but type 2 diabetes diagnoses climbed steadily. Metabolic syndrome became a recognized condition. Americans were eating less fat than at any point in the previous century and getting sicker in ways that correlated precisely with increased sugar and refined carbohydrate consumption. The guidelines said fat was the problem. The data said otherwise. The guidelines did not change. The dietary goals were revised and formalized as the dietary guidelines for Americans beginning in 1980. They have been updated every 5 years since. The process of updating them involves a committee of scientists. The scientists who serve on that committee have, in multiple documented cases, had financial relationships with food industry companies that benefited from specific recommendations. This is not a theory. The financial disclosure records are public. Researchers have analyzed them and published the findings in peer-reviewed journals. The same structure that produced the 1977 document has continued producing documents every 5 years since. The 2016 JAMA paper that revealed the Sugar Research Foundation payments was written by Christine Kearns, Laura Schmidt, and Stanton Glantz at the University of California, San Francisco. Glantz had spent his career documenting how the tobacco industry had manipulated science. When Kearns brought him the sugar industry documents, he recognized the methodology immediately. He said it was the same playbook. Fund research, control the question being asked, publish through credible channels, create enough scientific uncertainty to prevent regulatory action. The tobacco industry had used it for decades. The documents proving they had done so are now housed at the University of California, San Francisco Industry Documents Library, the same archive where the sugar documents were found. The sugar industry's internal documents describing their research strategy use language that is, in several places, nearly identical to the tobacco industry's internal strategy documents from the same era. Both sets of documents are publicly accessible. Almost nobody has read them. John Yudkin, the British researcher whose work linking sugar to heart disease, the industry had specifically targeted, published a book in 1972 called Pure White and Deadly. The Sugar Research Foundation responded by funding a coordinated campaign to discredit him. His academic reputation was damaged. His research was dismissed as unsupported. He died in 1995 without seeing his findings vindicated. His book was republished in 2012. The science that had dismissed him had by then been substantially revised. The 2015 Dietary Guidelines for Americans were the first to remove the upper limit on dietary fat. After nearly 40 years, the government quietly stopped saying fat was the enemy. There was no announcement, no acknowledgement of what the previous guidelines had done, no accounting for 4 decades of recommendations built on research that had been shaped by industry funding. The guidelines simply changed, and most people did not notice. The children who grew up eating low-fat cafeteria food under the guidelines are adults now. The generation that was told fat was dangerous and given sugar as the replacement is living inside the health outcomes that decision produced. Those outcomes are measurable. They are in the CDC data. They are in the insurance actuarial tables. They are in the type 2 diabetes diagnosis rates that have climbed every decade since the guidelines took effect. The Sugar Research Foundation documents are at the University of California, San Francisco. The Dietary Goals are in the Congressional Record. The New England Journal of Medicine paper from 1967 is publicly available. The financial disclosure records of the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee are published by the USDA. None of this is hidden. All of it has been available for years. What has not been available in the version of nutrition history most people absorbed is the sequence, the funding, the selection, the publication, the guidelines, the reformulation, the outcomes. The sequence is the story. In January 1977, a Senate committee published 41 pages that told you what to eat. The man who wrote the first draft was a journalist. The primary scientific advisor had been paid by the sugar industry a decade earlier to reach a specific conclusion. The conclusion became policy. The policy became the food on your plate. This was the moment someone decided what 200 million Americans would eat. They did not ask. The documents knew what they were doing. The question is whether you were ever supposed to find out.